My name is Natasa Loizou. I am a Cypriot. I have been living in Argentina for the last 18 years. I am an expert in international security, defense, and security policies. I'm very glad to be here, to be invited by Nicolas to moderate this panel on a subject that is of such importance and very linked to the previous channel that was about interconnecting security challenges in the European Union and the NATO zone. So this panel, which we had a lot of discussions about what was going to be focused on because it's a huge issue, we decided among the panelists to orient it on the geopolitical shifts and global conflicts that influence the EU enlargement process. As the EU considers expanding to the Western Balkans, it must navigate complex risks stemming from Russia's influence in Eastern Europe, fragile governance, and limited regional defense capacities. Geopolitical tensions in Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, along with conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza, add instability to the region, is further complicating the EU security and defense landscape. Additionally, migration pressures from the Middle East, organized crime, and political instability in candidate countries intensify internal threats. The consolidation of a multipolar world marked by rising powers like China and the strategic roles of Russia and Turkey further strains EU defense and foreign policies. Aligning security frameworks with NATO, addressing regional conflicts, and managing cyber threats and infosecurity remain critical. Successful enlargement will require robust cooperation, institutional strengthening, and significant investment in regional defense capacities, R&D oriented on security and military equipment, border security, counterterrorism, and governance reform to mitigate these multi-phase challenges in shifting international order. I would like to invite Mr. Vasilis Palmas, Minister of Defense of the Republic of Cyprus, as a key speaker to open the panel with his speech. Thank you.
Με ιδιαίτερη χαρά βρίσκομαι σήμερα μαζί σας στο 5ο ετήσιο συνέδριο Cyprus Forum. Εκφράζω τις ευχαριστίες μου στους διοργανωτές, στο Oxygen for Democracy, το Πανεπιστήμιο της Keynote Public Affairs και το Οικονομικό Φόρουμ των Δελφών, οι οποίοι, όπως και τις προηγούμενες χρονιές, επιδιώκουν μέσα από τις επικοδομητικές συζητήσεις να καταλήξουν σε συγκεκριμένες δράσεις και αποτελέσματα τα οποία θα προωθούν βιώσιμες και κοινωνικά υπεύθυνες πολιτικές στην Κύπρο και στην ευρύτερη περιοχή. Εκλεκτοί προσκεκλημένοι, κυρίες και κύριοι. Οι προτεργάτες που ενέπνευσαν τη δημιουργία του οικοδομήματος της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, αλλά και αυτοί που στη συνέχεια εργάστηκαν για την πρόοδο και την εξέλιξή της, αποτέλεσαν μια ποικιλόμορφη ομάδα οραματιστών και οραματιστριών με κοινά ωστόσο ιδανικά και στόχους. Κυριότερος από αυτούς ήταν η δημιουργία μιας ειρηνικής, ενωμένης και ευημερούσας Ευρώπης μέσα σε ένα πλαίσιο αμοιβαίας εμπιστοσύνης και συνεργασίας και αλληλοκατανόησης ανάμεσα στα εθνικά κράτη. Ο στόχος παρόλα αυτά μιας ειρηνικής, ενωμένης και ευημερούσας Ευρώπης δεν μπορεί να γίνει κατορθωτός χωρίς την επίτευξη ασφάλειας. Χωρίς σταθερότητα και προστασία από εσωτερικές και εξωτερικές απειλές και κινδύνους, η διατήρηση της ειρήνης, η προώθηση της συνεργασίας και η ανάπτυξη της ευημερίας είναι πρακτικά ανέφικτες. Όταν δεν αναφερόμαστε στην ασφάλεια ως απαραίτητη προϋπόθεση για την επίτευξη αυτών των στόχων, οφείλουμε να γνωρίζουμε ότι αυτή δεν έχει μια μόνο μορφή. Αποτελεί μια σύνθετη έννοια, η οποία περιλαμβάνει μεταξύ άλλων την προστασία της δημοκρατίας και των ανθρωπίνων δικαιωμάτων και τη διατήρηση σταθερών οικονομικών συνθηκών όπου οι κίνδυνοι είναι ελεγχόμενοι και η προστασία των οικονομικών και φυσικών πόρων εγγυημένη. Περιλαμβάνει επίσης τη διασφάλιση εσωτερικής ομαλότητας και εξωτερικής σταθερότητας και συνεργασίας οι οποίες εμπροκειμένου θα επιτρέπουν στα κράτη την αμοιβαία εμπιστοσύνη και τη συλλογική συνεισφορά στην αντιμετώπιση κοινών προκλήσεων, όπως η τρομοκρατία, το οργανωμένο έγκλημα και η παράνομη μετανάστευση. Καθώς επίσης και την προστασία από κυβερνοεπιθέσεις και την ταχεία και αποτελεσματική ικανότητα αντιμετώπισης, προσαρμογής και ανάκαμψης από αυτές. Συνολικά, ως εισαγωγή θα ανέφερα ότι η ασφάλεια αποτελεί θεμέλιο πάνω στο οποίο μπορεί να εδραστεί το οικοδόμημα της ΕΕ, όπως όλοι εμείς αντιλαμβανόμαστε. Στο σύγχρονο γεωπολιτικό περιβάλλον, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση αντιμετωπίζει όλο ένα αυξανόμενες απειλές και προκλήσεις. Αναφέρομαι ενδεικτικά στη συνέχιση της ανταγωνιστικότητας ανάμεσα σε παραδοσιακά μεγάλες δυνάμεις, στην ανάδυση νέων ισχυρών δρόντων, στην τρομοκρατία, στις κυβερνοεπιθέσεις, στις γεωπολιτικές αναταραχές και αστάθειες και στα αυξημένα κύματα μεταναστευτικών ροών. Αυτές οι προκλήσεις αποτελούν μια συντονισμένη και δυναμική στρατηγική ασφάλειας από την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, προκειμένου να διασφαλίσει αφενός την προστασία της επικράτειάς της, αφετέρου τη σταθερότητα των θεσμών της και ευημερία των πολιτών της, τόσο εντός όσο και εκτός των συνόρων της. Στην εξίσωση προστίθενται και οι συνέπειες της κλιματικής αλλαγής. Για να αντιμετωπιστεί το ταχαίως μεταβαλλόμενο γεωπολιτικό τοπίο, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση χρειάζεται να υιοθετήσει μια κοινή πολιτική ασφάλειας και άμυνας που θα αναπροσαρμόζεται στα νέα δεδομένα και προκλήσεις. Αυτό απαιτεί μεταξύ άλλων την αύξηση των επενδύσεων για την ενίσχυση των αμυντικών της δυνατοτήτων και την προώθηση των καινοτόμων τεχνολογιών, για την ανάπτυξη στρατιωτικών δυνατοτήτων εχμής, την κάλυψη στρατηγικών κενών και τη μείωση των τεχνολογικών και βιομηχανικών εξαρτήσεων. Η αδιάλειπτη επανεξέταση και αξιολόγηση της αρχιτεκτονικής ασφάλειας θεωρείται εκ των όνου κάνευ, αν λάβουμε υπόψη τις νέες αλλά και τις μεταβαλλόμενες απειλές και την ανάγκη για ένα συντονισμένο και ευέλικτο στρατηγικό σχεδιασμό, ώστε η Ευρώπη να μπορεί να ανταποκριθεί άμεσα και αποτελεσματικά στις σύγχρονες προκλήσεις, να ενισχύσει την ανθεκτικότητα των κρίσιμων υποδομών της και να διασφαλίσει τη συνοχή και την αλληλεγγύη μεταξύ των κρατών μελών της. Κυρίες και κύριοι, για τρίτη συνεχή χρονιά η Ευρώπη συνεχίζει να αντιμετωπίζει την αναπόφευκτη αμήλικτη πραγματικότητα ότι η ειρήνη και η ασφάλεια δεν μπορούν να θεωρούνται ως δεδομένες. Παρά το γεγονός ότι από το τέλος του Β' Παγκοσμίου Πολέμου και εντεύθεν έχουμε βιώσει μια σχετικά μακρά περίοδο ειρήνης, παρά τις ψυχροπολεμικές εντάσεις και συγκρούσεις, κυρίως στην Άπο Ανατολή και Μέση Ανατολή, αλλά και στα Βαλκάνια, οι τελευταίες διαδοχικές κρίσεις με την πανδημία του κορονοϊού, την εισβολή της Ρωσίας στην Ουκρανία και την οικονομική ύφεση της σύγκρουσης στο Ισραήλ και την κατάσταση στην Ερυθρά Θάλασσα, μεταξύ άλλων έχουν καταστήσει σαφή τη ραγδαία ταχύτητα με την οποία δύνανται να μεταβληθούν όλα όσα μέχρι πρότινος θεωρούνταν ως ελεγχόμενα. Ως εκ τούτου, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, για να είναι σε θέση να διαμορφώσει τις κατάλληλες πολιτικές για την αντιμετώπιση κάθε πρόκλησης, κλήθηκε να προβεί στην αναγνώριση και μελέτη ενός ευρέως φάσματος παραδοσιακών και νεοφανών απειλών, που αμφισβητούν και απειλούν να κλονίσουν την περιφερειακή και παγκόσμια ειρήνη και ασφάλεια, τα συμφέροντά της και όσα και αυτές καθεαυτές τις αρχές και τις αξίες της. Ο πόλεμος στην Ουκρανία, ο οποίος αποτελεί μέγιστη απειλή για την περιφερειακή, την ευρωπαϊκή αλλά και την παγκόσμια ασφάλεια, έχει οδηγήσει τα κράτη της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και όχι μόνο σε μια νέα κούρσα εξοπλισμών και έχει εν πολλοίς λειτουργήσει καταλυτικά στη διαμόρφωση συνθηκών ενίσχυσης της συνεργασίας ανάμεσα στα κράτη-μέλη της Ένωσης. Η προδιετίας υιοθέτηση εκ μέρους της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης της στρατηγικής πυξίδας του τρίτου στρατηγικού εγγράφου μετά την Ευρωπαϊκή Στρατηγική Ασφάλειας του 2003, European Security Strategy, και την Παγκόσμια Στρατηγική της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης του 2016, EU Global Strategy, καθώς επίσης η Συμφωνία για ενίσχυση της Ευρωπαϊκής Αμυντικής Βιομηχανίας μέσω κοινών προμηθειών καταδεικνύουν τόσο την πολυπλοκότητα του παγκόσμιου περιβάλλοντος, όσο και το υψηλό επίπεδο δέσμευσης της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης στην επιδίωξη, κατοχύρωση και προστασία συνθηκών ασφάλειας, αλλά και τη φιλοδοξία της να διαδραματίσει ενεργό ρόλο ως παγκόσμιου παροχέα ασφάλειας. Οι αυξανόμενες ανησυχίες για επιδείνωση της ποιότητας ασφάλειας αντικατοπτρίζονται ολοένα και περισσότερο στις πολιτικές πρωτοβουλίες που ανέλαβαν τα θεσμικά όργανα της Ένωσης τα τελευταία χρόνια, μεταξύ άλλων για την ενίσχυση της στρατιωτικής κινητικότητας, την ανάπτυξη των δυνατοτήτων ταχείας αντίδρασης και την ενίσχυση των στρατηγικών εταιρικών σχέσεων. Τον Μάρτιο του 2023, ο ύπατος εκπρόσωπος της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης για θέματα εξωτερικής πολιτικής και πολιτικής ασφάλειας δήλωσε ότι η Ευρώπη πρέπει να μάθει να μιλά τη γλώσσα της δύναμης και πρόσθεσε ότι την επόμενη δεκαετία η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση θα κάνει ένα μεγάλο άλμα, ούτως ώστε να καταστεί πιο ισχυρός, αποφασιστικός πάροχος ασφάλειας, καλύτερα προετοιμασμένος να αντιμετωπίσει τις υφιστάμενες και μελλοντικές απειλές και προκλήσεις. Στην έκθεση προόδου για το δεύτερο έτος υλοποίησης της στρατηγικής πυξίδας επισημάνθηκε ανάμεσα σε άλλα η επίγουσα ανάγκη ενίσχυσης της άμυνας και της ασφάλειας της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, ειδικά μετά τη ρωσική εισβολή στην Ουκρανία, και αναπτύχθηκε η επιτευχθήσα πρόοδος σε διάφορους τομείς όπως η στρατιωτική υποστήριξη στην Ουκρανία, η αντιμετώπιση υβριδικών απειλών, η ενίσχυση της ασφάλειας στον κυβερνοχώρο και στο διάστημα και η ενίσχυση των εταιρικών σχέσεων. Τονίστηκε επίσης η σημασία της αύξησης των αμυντικών δαπανών, της βελτίωσης της συνεργασίας μεταξύ των κρατών μελών και της ενίσχυσης της ευρωπαϊκής αμυντικής βιομηχανίας. Σημαντικό επίσης σκέλος της πολιτικής ασφάλειας της Ένωσης αποτελεί και η ενεργειακή διάσταση και εμπροκειμένου η ανάγκη μείωσης των ενεργειακών εξαρτήσεων, ιδιαίτερα από τη Ρωσία. Σε αυτό το πλαίσιο, εκ μέρους της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης αναγνωρίζεται η ανάγκη προστασίας των κρίσιμων υποδομών της συμπεριλαμβανομένων και ενεργειακών υποδομών. Συνοπτικά, αυτό που απαιτείται και αυτό το οποίο καταβάλλονται προσπάθειες είναι η μετεξέλιξη της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης σε ένα πιο δυναμικό και αποτελεσματικό διεθνή δρόντα στον τομέα της άμυνας και της ασφάλειας. Ενδεικτική σε αυτό το πλαίσιο είναι η απόφαση για διορισμό του πρώτου Επιτρόπου Άμυνας στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, ο οποίος αναμένεται να εργαστεί για την ανάπτυξη της Ευρωπαϊκής Αμυντικής Ένωσης και την ενίσχυση των επενδύσεων στη βιομηχανική παραγωγή. Μετά την έναρξη του πολέμου στην Ουκρανία, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση έχει κινητοποιηθεί σε πρωτοφανή έκταση και ένταση, καταδικάζοντας επανειλημμένως τον επιθετικό πόλεμο και επιβάλλοντας 14 δέσμες κυρώσεων κατά της Ρωσίας, εξέφρασε την πρόθεσή της για συνέχιση της παροχής ισχυρής οικονομικής, ανθρωπιστικής, στρατιωτικής και διπλωματικής στήριξης στην Ουκρανία. Ενδεικτικά, σε ό,τι αφορά την οικονομική στήριξη της χώρας για τη διετία 2022-2024, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, πέραν της στήριξης από τα κράτη-μέλη, 35 δις ευρώ, κινητοποίησε 6,1 δις ευρώ στο πλαίσιο του Ευρωπαϊκού Μηχανισμού για την Ειρήνη για ανταπόκριση στις στρατιωτικές και αμυντικές ανάγκες της Ουκρανίας. Επιπλέον, τον Μάρτιο του 2024, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση αποφάσισε να αυξήσει το χρηματοδοτικό όριο του EPF κατά 5 δις ευρώ με τη σύσταση ειδικού ταμείου βοήθειας για την Ουκρανία. Με την απόφαση αυτή, η συνολική χρηματοδότηση στήριξης που χορηγείται μέσω του Ευρωπαϊκού Μηχανισμού για την Ειρήνη ανέρχεται σε 11,1 δις ευρώ. Επιπλέον, έλαβε την απόφαση ενίσχυσης της τεχνολογικής και βιομηχανικής βάσης του αμυντικού της τομέα, η οποία, όπως αποδείχθηκε, απαιτείται να καταστεί περισσότερο καινοτόμος, ανταγωνιστική και ανθεκτική. Μέσω του Ευρωπαϊκού Ταμείου Άμυνας, το οποίο αποτελεί τον ακρογωνιαίο λίθο για τη στρατηγική αυτονομία της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και ενθαρρύνει τη συνεργασία μεταξύ επιχειρήσεων καθώς και ερευνητικών κέντρων, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση στοχεύει στην ενίσχυση της συνεργασίας στον τομέα της άμυνας μεταξύ των κρατών μελών. Μέσω του Ταμείου επιδιώκεται η ενίσχυση της ανταγωνιστικότητας, της αποτελεσματικότητας και της ικανότητας καινοτομίας της ευρωπαϊκής αμυντικής και τεχνολογικής βάσης και η στήριξη της έρευνας και ανάπτυξης αμυντικών προϊόντων. Σε ένα άλλο επίπεδο, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση επιδιώκει την ενίσχυση της ασφάλειας της μέσω της αναζωογόνησης της διαδικασίας διεύρυνσής της. Μέσω της ένταξης νέων μελών, ενθαρρύνεται η σταθερότητα και εδραιώνεται η δημοκρατία σε περιοχές που ενδεχομένως να χαρακτηρίζονται από πολιτική αστάθεια. Επιπλέον, η ένταξη νέων χωρών ενισχύει τη συλλογική ασφάλεια της Ένωσης, μειώνει τις κοινωνικές και οικονομικές ανισότητες, στοιχείο το οποίο περιορίζει εν μέρει τις εντάσεις και τις συγκρούσεις, αυξάνει την γεωπολιτική επιρροή της Ευρώπης, επιτρέποντας της να διαδραματίζει σημαντικό ρόλο σε διεθνείς υποθέσεις και ενισχύει τις δυνατότητες άμυνας και ασφάλειας της μέσω της ενίσχυσης της αμυντικής συνεργασίας και της συνεισφοράς των εθνικών στρατών σε κοινωνικές στρατιωτικές αποστολές, σε κοινές στρατιωτικές αποστολές. Ως Κυπριακή Δημοκρατία, στηρίζουμε τις προσπάθειες διεύρυνσης της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης και τις προοπτικές νέων κρατών μελών, καθότι η ένταξη νέων χωρών στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση συμβάλλει στην περαιτέρω σταθεροποίηση και στον περιορισμό της δράσης άλλων δρόντων στην περιοχή και αποτελεί σημαντικό βήμα για την ενίσχυση της ασφάλειας, της δημοκρατίας και της συνεργασίας στην Ευρώπη. Ως Κυπριακή Δημοκρατία, θεωρούμε πως η ένταξη νέων κρατών μπορεί να ενισχύσει την γεωπολιτική μας θέση και να προωθήσει τις κοινές μας αξίες για την ειρήνη, τη σταθερότητα και την ευημερία στην περιοχή. Σε ό,τι αφορά στην περιοχή της Ανατολικής Μεσογείου και ειδικότερα μετά την έναρξη της σύγκρουσης στη Γάζα και την κρίση στην Ερυθρά Θάλασσα, το περιβάλλον ασφάλειας καθίσταται ακόμα πιο περίπλοκο. Ανέκαθεν, η περιοχή αποτελεί πεδίο σκληρών συγκρούσεων με γεωπολιτικές και γεωστρατηγικές ανακατατάξεις. Ένας από τους βασικούς κρίκους της μακράς αλυσίδας των κρίσεων και των συγκρούσεων που εκτιλήσονται εδώ και δεκαετίες στην περιοχή αποτελεί και το κυπριακό πρόβλημα και οι συνεχείς παράνομες προκλητικές δραστηριότητες της Τουρκίας στο έδαφος, στα χωρικά ύδατα και την αποκλειστική οικονομική ζώνη της Κυπριακής Δημοκρατίας, οι οποίες παραβιάζουν καταφανώς το διεθνές δίκαιο και διαταράσσουν την ομαλότητα και την ειρήνη. Η Κυπριακή Δημοκρατία, διαχρονικά αναγνωρίζοντας αφενός ότι η ευρύτερη Ανατολική Μεσόγειος αποτελεί μια εξαιρετικά ευαίσθητη περιοχή, στην οποία προκύπτουν πολύ συχνά ένοπλες συγκρούσεις, και αφετέρου ότι η αποξένωση δεν είναι βιώσιμη επιλογή για ένα μικρό κράτος, υλοποιώντας μεθοδικά μια στοχευμένη εξωτερική πολιτική, έθεσε ως στόχο τη βελτίωση και εμβάθυνση των σχέσεών της με τα γειτονικά κράτη και σημαντικούς δρόντες στην περιφέρεια. Επιδιώκουμε μέσω αυτών των σχέσεων να δημιουργήσουμε ένα πλαίσιο συνεργασίας και εμπιστοσύνης, να δημιουργήσουμε ένα πλαίσιο συνεργασίας το οποίο θα ενισχύει τις προσπάθειες για επίτευξη και διατήρηση ειρήνης, σταθερότητας και ασφάλειας στην περιοχή και θα συνεισφέρει στη διαδικασία επίτευξης των στόχων που έχει θέσει η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση στο πλαίσιο της Ευρωπαϊκής Πολιτικής Γειτονίας για διατήρηση της ασφάλειας και της ισορροπίας ανάμεσα στα πολλαπλά και ραγδαίως διαμορφούμενα ανταγωνιστικά συμφέροντα των δρόντων στην νότια γειτονιά. Ως κράτος μέλος της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, αντιλαμβανόμαστε πλήρως τις δυνατότητές μας και δηλώνουμε παρός σε όλα τα γεγονότα που συμβαίνουν γύρω μας. Χαρακτηριστικό παράδειγμα αποτελεί η συμβολή μας στις διεθνείς προσπάθειες για εκκένωση και υποδοχή αμάχων πολιτών τόσο από το Σουδάν όσο και από το Ισραήλ, οι οποίες αναδεικνύουν ξανά την Κύπρο ως ένα σταθερό πυλώνα στη διαχείριση των ανθρωπιστικών κρίσεων στην ευρύτερη περιοχή. Ως Κυπριακή Δημοκρατία και ειδικότερα ως Υπουργείο Άμυνας, στο πλαίσιο του αναφέρετου δικαιώματος μας για την προστασία των πολιτών μας και τη διασφάλιση της άμυνας της πατρίδας μας, ενισχύουμε μεθοδικά την επιχειρησιακή μας ετοιμότητα και την αποτρεπτική μας ικανότητα. Με τη διατήρηση των αμυντικών μας δυνατοτήτων σε υψηλό επίπεδο, μέσω της ενδυνάμωσης της αποτρεπτικής ικανότητας της εθνικής φρουράς, αποσκοπούμε στη διαφύλαξη της εθνικής μας ασφάλειας και της εδαφικής μας ακεραιότητας. Κυρίες και κύριοι, έχει καταστεί σαφές ότι βρισκόμαστε σε μια εποχή πρωτοφανών προκλήσεων. Η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση καλείται να αναπροσαρμόσει τις στρατηγικές της, να ενισχύσει τους μηχανισμούς της συνεργασίας στην άμυνα και είναι πρώτη στο ζήτημα πολιτικής βούλησης και οικονομικής ανθεκτικότητας. Σε έναν κόσμο όπου οι απειλές μεταβάλλονται ταχύτητα, η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση πρέπει να παραμείνει ευέλικτη, να επενδύσει στην καινοτομία και να διατηρήσει τον ηγετικό της ρόλο ως παράγοντα ειρήνης και σταθερότητας. Το νέο γεωπολιτικό σκηνικό απαιτεί από εμάς να προσαρμόσουμε τις στρατηγικές μας και να ενισχύσουμε τις συμμαχίες μας τόσο εντός όσο και εκτός των συνόρων της Ευρώπης. Μόνο μέσα από τη συλλογική προσπάθεια και τη διαρκή συνεργασία μπορούμε να διασφαλίσουμε μια ασφαλή, ισχυρή και ευημερούσα Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση, έτοιμη να αντιμετωπίσει τις προκλήσεις του μέλλοντος.
Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Η κυρία Rafti είναι η διπλωματική μου σύμβουλος και θα μπορέσει να απαντήσει αυτές τις ερωτήσεις. Εκείνος είναι ο διευθυντής του γραφείου, μεταξύ αυτών των δύο.
Okay. So after the key speaker, where we noted a lot of concepts that we want as a panel to bring into a debate from different perspectives, geographical, but also academic and as practitioners, I would like to present the three panelists. Gijs de Vries is Senior Visiting Fellow from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Evan Kalpadakis is Coordinator for Alexis Tsipras Institute for Peace, Justice and Sustainable Growth. And Elena Rafti is Diplomatic Advisor to the Minister of Defense from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Cyprus. Okay, the dynamic will be that each one of the panelists will try to develop some ideas and positions for around 5 minutes. And then we can exchange questions among ourselves and, of course, open to the public in order to have a discussion. So, Gijs, you're opening up the panel.
Well, thank you very much. I'll do my best to stick to the 5 minutes. In the last email I received, there was still a generous 8, but they have been they have been slowly shrinking. I'll do my best. So first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to be back in Cyprus, a country where I have many fond memories and indeed some family relations. So very happy to be back. And congratulations on Cyprus' 20th anniversary as a member state of the European Union. I very much think that Cyprus has already given a lot to the EU in terms of ideas, contributions, viewpoints. But I think in the coming years, more will even be asked, because as the Minister has just said, strengthening European cooperation will be an absolute priority. So, without further ado, that was 30 seconds. Security, first. 3 main challenges. One, obviously, Russia. Russia has just said it will increase its military spending by 25%, so that security and defense will account for 40% of the annual Russian budget. Secondly, it is expanding its military so that it will become the second largest in the world after China, surpassing both India and the United States in terms of numbers. Russia is putting its economy on a war footing. And there is a reason for that. It is very clear, President Putin has said this on many occasions, that he wants to reconstitute a sphere of influence for Russia which coincides with the borders of the former Soviet Union, therefore including countries that are currently member states of the European Union. Second challenge, China. President Xi Jinping is trying to build China into the world's preeminent economic power and into Asia's strongest military and political power. President Xi has also said that he wants a military option available to China in relation to Taiwan by 2027, 2028. I think we would all be wise to take that very seriously. There is a risk of growing military tensions in Asia that will affect Europe. Thirdly, there is, of course, the wider Middle East. We've all seen the news. I don't need to talk about the Israeli wars currently going on. It's clear that Israel has bought itself time for a political solution, because Israel can strike hard, as it is doing at Hamas and at Hezbollah, but it cannot eradicate either. So there is now time for a political solution. The question is, are politicians willing to move in that direction? Iran has been humiliated. A humiliated enemy is not necessarily weaker, but can be more unpredictable and more dangerous. Third challenge. Can Europe count on the American protection as we have for the past 80 years? I think the American guarantee is less predictable than it has been for a long time. Donald Trump has said very clearly that unless the Europeans pay more for defense, he is not willing to defend them. He said quite literally, he would not protect them in case of a Russian attack. In fact, he said, I would encourage the Russians to, quote, do whatever the hell they want. His candidate for Vice President, Vance, is slightly more polite, but has said the same thing in more academic terms. But apart from who wins the US presidential elections, America will have no choice but to turn more towards Asia in the next 10 years. So these three trends, plus an unclear role of the United States in the longer term, where does that leave Europe? On the positive side, the war in Ukraine has been a wake-up call for many European countries, which are now spending more on defense. On the negative side, the sense of urgency, I think, is still quite limited. National politicians in Europe still do not talk hard security to their electorates. They talk about it, but in seminars, and not on television or in the street. That will have to change. The British Army, according to a recent quote by a senior British defense official, and I think it's a serious quote, is, and I quote, not prepared to fight and win an armed conflict of any scale. That may be an overstatement, but it is a worry that I think applies to most continental armies, and indeed also to the United States. What can we do about that? What's the problem? The problem is, first, a lack of spending still in many countries, including countries like Spain and Italy. Second, a waste of money on duplication of projects. We have many more weapon systems than the Americans, and frankly, we don't need all of them. Countries buy national instead of buying European. The EU is helping, the minister has already referred to that, but the scale of the EU support is quite limited, partly because the Germans don't want the European Union to become too strong in the military sense. When the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte ran the Dutch governments, he cut national defense in the Netherlands. As Secretary General of NATO, his task is now to encourage the Dutch and others to spend more. I hope he will succeed. So that, I think, is, in a nutshell, some of the essence of the security situation. Very quickly, a few words about enlargement, if I still have, or would you like me to stop here? You would like me to stop here. Then I move on, and we do enlargement later. Go ahead.
So thank you very much. I can pick up on enlargement and focus a bit more on the European enlargement. I think you're very clear on the security challenges. But if we're going to put the discussion on European enlargement into context, we have to understand that it's a process that did not take place in the past in a vacuum and is not taking place now in a geopolitical vacuum. Europe has become bigger and bigger during a period of Western ascendancy, of getting stronger and stronger during the Cold War, during the détente period, and then in a unipolar world from 1990 on after the fall of the Soviet Union. The European enlargement of 1975, for example, 1973, as well as 1995, was a European enlargement to consolidate the unity of Western and Northern Europe together. The European enlargement of the early 80s in the Mediterranean is a process in which, in a post-fascist period, a period after the military dictatorships in Portugal, in Spain, in Greece, the European Union was passing on its institutions and its institutional model, its support for democracy, for the rule of law, to 3 Mediterranean countries. The European enlargement process of 2004 was a longer process that came exactly in the post-communist transition period for several countries in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet Union. And it was again a process by which Europe, as an institutional model, was passing on important institutions that had to do with the rule of law and democracy. This is a completely different security environment than the one we have today when we're talking about European enlargement. Today, what we are seeing is a transition towards a multipolar world in an environment of multi-crises, of parallel crises that come together. And we can analyze what these are today, and they're not just security challenges. But But it is a completely different security environment, and in this environment, it is clear that a lot of the problems we face is because in the West, we have not accepted this transition demands new institutions, new mechanisms, and a new type of strategy, new type of diplomacy to move ahead. European enlargement in this context has to be based on a different direction, a much more strategic direction about what the EU wants to do in the Western Balkans, in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Georgia, in a much more strategic direction so that we don't simply use the tools that we had in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 2000s for European enlargement under a completely different security environment and copy-paste them on a process that is completely different today. If we try to do that, and that's what we in part have been trying to do all this time, we will reach a deadlock, and we see the deadlock happening. We had the opportunity to have a big leap in terms of European enlargement right after the Prespa agreement in 2018. This did not happen. We had an opportunity to have a leap in European enlargement in the Western Balkans in 2022 in terms of substance also in the Western Balkans with the events in Ukraine and with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And what do we see as time goes by? We see that the accession status is given to Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Bosnia, but we don't see the tools that we need to move ahead in the next years. How exactly is this enlargement going to take place? We need a different approach. We can talk about this. For me, I believe it is a phased approach, focusing in a different direction, particularly in terms of the economy. We need to think of the issues you raised in terms of energy, security, technology in a different way. I think the Draghi report gives us an insight into how this could be, but we have to be much braver in order to do this. And we need to be thinking of the role that the EU wants to have in the region. I think Greece and Cyprus, and we can talk more about this, have a key role to play in the region in terms of European enlargement. The Minister of Defense referred to parts of the role of what this role can be, but I think there's a lot more to do from the part of both Greece and Cyprus, and there we need not just braver leadership in terms of Europe about how to move ahead, we need braver leadership also in Greece and Cyprus so that we can be at the front of this European strategy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for this. And if you allow me to pick up on some of these points and maybe diverge slightly on what has been said. I think it is true that we are faced with new global dynamics, a more contested, multipolar world, and this has given the impetus to the EU to learn to speak the language of power, as High Representative Borrell has said, or at least this is the ambition. I think the Russian aggression against Ukraine provided the trigger for this geopolitical awakening, and the response of the EU is to have this push to become a geopolitical actor that defends and pursues not only its values, its normative values, but also its interests. And this is something that has been defined in the strategic compass. So this new dynamics provided the impetus for a plethora of defense initiatives within the EU. And at the same time, I think they reinvigorated an enlargement process which has been languishing since 2003. So now I think there is a realization that we cannot have gray zones. We cannot have bridges of areas that are subject or fragile to spheres of influence of other actors. It is important not to have this for the security of Europe. So to work for our security interests, we must also pursue enlargement to bring in those regions. So the new enlargement process is infused with this dynamic, if you want, of a bloc consolidation, I could call it. I think also there was this question of whether we have a different methodology, whether this is simply a new enlargement that has to be a tool of attaining geopolitical objectives, but not be based on different processes of merit, as we saw in previous enlargements, on a driver for these countries to become more democratic, to adopt the values of the EU. But I would question whether there's an inherent tension or contradiction between having a process of democratization and also to have a geopolitical impetus behind that. So it can be sort of a nexus that combines the geopolitical considerations with the normative ones, because I think the normative framework is very important to the self-perception of the EU. I would also argue that the previous enlargements were also geopolitical, because I think what they did was to anchor countries into the social, political, and security structures of the West. And definitely from sitting here in Nicosia and from a country that had its particularities, I would say that yes, it was a geopolitical decision. Again, there are some similarities now. Unprecedented choices have been made to bring in countries that have active warfare, an enlargement that will enlarge also the border when it happens of the EU with Russia. We're going to bring in a lot of small countries, which also will have implications. At the same time, I think we need to see some of the opportunities that are presented. To be a global player, you need to have more population. This will happen with the enlargement. I think also countries will be brought in with a more favorable demographic markers. I think it's important to say that more young people will come in because demography is essential. It's also essential in ways, for example, in innovation, which is a driver for technology. This is something important to consider. Access to critical resources that some of the new countries will bring in. Capable armies, resilient societies. So let's support them. Let's buttress them in this quest to join the EU. I think, again, Cyprus has been a supporter of the enlargement process, and we will continue to be so. I would also like to discuss a little bit, perhaps later, on what is the role of Cyprus and Greece and countries in the southern neighborhood, and what is happening right now. How defense and CSDP, does it have a role in this? We have also seen for the first time with the Aspides, for example, a willingness of the EU to go in to defend global commons at seas. So one is the routes, and the other thing which is very important for Greece, Cyprus, and others is the seabed infrastructure. So we see the EU going in new ways. We have an article also 42.7 in the treaty for mutual defense. That is important for our strategic autonomy. We have to put flesh on the bones because it's not clarified what mechanism. But I think there's a lot there, and perhaps I would stop here and we could discuss further. Thank you very much.
Okay, I would like to ask now how many people would like to ask questions so that we can... Wow! Okay, we have 4. Angeliki, you know we have to extend. Okay, I would like to, before giving the floor to the public, I would like to give it to Higgs because he wants to respond to Elena, and then I will open up to you.
No, thank you very much. I agree very much with both of your points of view, and certainly that enlargement is a geopolitical priority and it should be seen as such. I also think that what you mentioned about the EU defense clause is quite important. Perhaps people in the audience may know that in 2022, just after Russia had invaded Ukraine, Sweden and Finland, which at the time were not NATO member states, wrote a joint letter to the European Union invoking the European Union defense clause and asking the European Union to step into the security vacuum which was in Northern Europe at the time. So this is a live clause. And I think it is important to put some more flesh on the bones of that article in the years to come. We will have no choice. But I will not go into the enlargement discussion right now because there are many questions. But I would like to come back at some point to the internal politics of the European Union. Because much as I agree with the geopolitical priority, I fear there are some very, very significant hurdles at European level before enlargement can take place. And I think we should name those and try to deal with them in the years to come.
Okay, thank you. I'll just hand it on.
Hello, my name is Ksenia Mukhortova. I'm a president of Community of Ukrainian Cypriot Friendship. Even my not very high level of Greek let me understand that Honorable Minister was talking about hybrid challenges to the security. So my question is about the informational defense of Cyprus, because as I can see, no Russian entity was closed in Cyprus. We still have several Russian houses. Just a few days ago, they celebrated annexation of the territories. They act under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia with their embassy. They invite Russian military to come to have lectures for teenagers talking about war. It's all on their Facebook page. You can just enter it and look at it. So no, Russian propaganda is not opposed at all at Cyprus. This is what I observe. So what is done about it, and when will it stop?
Hello, thank you very much for this insightful panel. My name is Marina. I'm with the American University of Beirut Mediterranean. I'm a master's student. And I wanted to ask specifically with regard to the security challenges and policy development in the EU. I want to ask about the safety strategies in the sphere of growing technological warfare, specifically whether it's displayed with the pagers exploding in Lebanon or also fears in AI interfering with security with personal data.
Hello, I'm a graduate from the University of Cyprus. I wanted to ask how we're going to make the European citizens to understand what countries are the threats. To give an example, how we're going to make the citizens of the Baltic states understand that Cypriots and Greeks see Turkey as a threat, and how we're going to make like Cypriots and Greeks understand that Russia is a threat to Europe.
Thank you very much. Gijs from Cyprus MOD. Firstly, allow me to just say that we sympathize with the Ukrainian people. Actually, we are suffering from similar aggressive. Actually, we are suffering from similar aggressive actions from aggressive countries. Elena, if you allow me, I can just give a clue about what you said. The Cyprus competent authorities are in close cooperation with the European Union, and actually we are cooperating in the Stratcom domain, and we are following and we are participating in all the fora regarding this Stratcom campaign for Ukraine. That's all that I can say. And the question, please. Elena, you referred to the article 42.7. This is my question, and thank you for referring to this. I'm always posing this question actually when I'm in Brussels, and I would like to listen to your ideas as well. Article 5 NATO vis-a-vis 42.7, and let's say a possible scenario of an aggression of Turkey towards Cyprus, and what is going to happen with this Article 42.7, and what's the credibility of the EU as we are speaking about the EU enlargement and security. Can this article be applied?
Okay. Who wants to take the floor? We have a difficult question, your question, which is very technical. I don't know if anyone in the panel can respond that, but I believe from my perspective, I cannot respond it either, right? But I believe it's a very, very military-oriented counter-information security question to respond, and I believe it's not the environment to respond to that. So sorry. Who wants to?
Well, thank you for all the questions and the breadth of questions posed on information, misinformation, disinformation, strategic communication. Yes, we're following the lead of the EU. We have helped to develop that. Cyprus has been subject to hybrid threats, also in the information domain, for many years, so we know. Let me just say, beyond everything else, the strongest weapon, I think, to fight this is to have resilient, strong democratic societies, to also make sure that our citizens are able to judge and to counter this. But countering disinformation, misinformation, is something that all EU countries do, and of course we continue doing it. On the technology question, yes, it's a rather technical one, but of course we're going to see more and more technological developments. The EU must invest in this. Our world is going to change. AI, technology is going to change it. This is one of the points. Why is it good to bring in these countries that have young populations? Because, we like it or not, the young are the engine of innovation. We need to invest as European Union in that, and we need to have these people, these bright people from these countries that are maybe not able to have opportunities in their own countries to be able to do this. It will also, given that there is integration of the markets, let's say in Western Balkans with the EU, it would even the transaction cost would go down. So this is another important thing of why we should proceed with the enlargement. On 42.7, yes, it's an article that we must all try and clarify the mechanisms. I mean, it is there, in theory stronger, Article 5. Perhaps not as strong as some previous Western European Union articles, as I read it, but it is there. I mean, there are also some absences, to be fair there, on the institutional front, because the institutions are not mentioned there in Article 42.7 or how we respond. But it is there, and also the duty of solidarity is a treaty-based duty. So this is very strong, and I think the European family has shown, and we will continue to show, the solidarity to each other. We need also to discuss about the institutional makeup, obviously, before an enlargement. And was there something else?
There was a question about how countries define other countries as a threat to their societies, which I think is something that you mentioned about countries making.
So I will
leave it to.
Just to say that every country's history, vantage point, because geography is not destiny, but geography is determinant of a lot of things. So our history is our vantage point, our size will also determine how we view things. But let me just say that I think within the EU we are able to work, and we have worked to sort of define collectively our security interests and also what is our challenges. So I think a lot has been done, and there have been great strides in this field within the EU.
I think all the microphones are closed. We hear you.
No, it's on. On Russian hybrid strategy. I cannot comment on the situation here, but in general, I think that we should take this new form of warfare, which is just below the level of military conflict, extremely seriously. And not only when it comes to Russia, Iran practices similar activities, China practices similar activities. And there are two things you can do. One is to take action directly against sources of this type of disinformation electronically. That is the kinetic side, if you wish. But the more important side, and I think the two have to go together, is the point that you raised, is preparing the population. And that starts at the level of education. It starts at school level. Children have to learn the difference between truth and lies. They have to learn that democracy is there to be defended, that democracy is vulnerable, and that it takes an effort from every individual to make up his or her own mind when it comes to what they take and what they don't take from the internet. And that skill of dealing with electronic media is a skill that we need to teach children at a very early age, because as adults they need to practice it. There was a question in the back about how Cyprus can help Northern Europe understand its situation and how the Baltics can explain theirs in the south. One of the mechanisms there is exchange. Through the Erasmus program and through other programs, getting people from one particular EU member state to visit other EU member states, either physically or online. Again, links between schools can be an extremely useful element. Online joint projects by schools across European borders, so that kids in high school work on parallel projects simultaneously, which means they get in touch with each other and start to communicate. Kids are terribly curious about each other. How is life in Estonia? I've got no idea. Cyprus, whereabouts is that? I've got no idea. Tell me about yourself. That is where this has to be built. Building Europe starts at the level of individuals, of human beings, who have to learn that they are not only Cypriots, they are Cypriots and Europeans. They are not only Estonians, they're Estonians and Europeans. We have a dual identity. I think that's absolutely fundamental. I should stop there. We can't deal with enlargement, but I have a problem with enlargement. We haven't discussed the nuts and bolts. Anyway.
I'd like to talk about enlargement. So about enlargement, I think we have to refocus a little bit the point. I think most definitely, as we said, previous enlargements were geopolitical enlargements. They were about consolidating Europe and the European project at a time of Western strength, both during the end of the Cold War and after 1990 and the fall of the Soviet Union. In these times, the challenges were very different that had to do with consolidating the strength of the European Union. Now the challenges we face with the enlargement countries are very different. So the tools we need are very different. I'd like to quote the former Chief of Staff of Barack Obama, who said, "We live in a time of Western leadership, but not Western primacy." At a time of Western leadership without Western primacy, the tools we need to use are going to be different, and the enlargement process has to be based on a differentiated architecture. It cannot be the same model we used for Denmark in 1973, Greece in 1981, Poland in 2004, Sweden in 1995. We use the same model going ahead using institutions, European institutions that will be copied and integrated, etc., in European countries. We need a differentiated architecture, which means a differentiated strategy. A different one for the Western Balkans, a different one for Ukraine, a different one for Moldova and Georgia. And that means, it doesn't mean moving back in terms of our values, but it means having a strategy in terms of how they unfold in relation to a phased approach for enlargement. Putting, for example, economic integration first before changes in terms of the rule of law or in terms of justice. If we don't do this, and we just use the same old models in a different period, that is a completely different geopolitical period, at a time where, contrary to what was happening in Greece in 1981 or Denmark in 73 or Poland in 2004, we have adversaries in these countries. We have state and non-state forces that we have to face. If we don't use a phased approach and a strategy, if we don't do more, and there I think we need to do more. I don't think there have been leaps in terms of the strategic compass, the strategic logic of Europe. We will not be able to move ahead with European enlargement. To add to that, you're right that we need to define threats in this environment, but this cannot be disconnected to how we deal with them. To say that there is a threat is not enough if you don't know how exactly you're going to deal with them. To say that Cyprus or Greece need to be able to use Article 42.7 and invoke it if there is a violation of the the sovereign rights or sovereignty of Greece and Cyprus is not enough for what we need to do today. We need at the same time to have a positive agenda, a positive strategy for enlargement and for the region. We need, as you said, to talk to the youth about what exactly it means to be in Europe, what it means to live in a democracy, what it means to tell between lies and realities, and that takes self-criticism also. That means that, first of all, we have to accept the mistakes that we in the West have made in the past years, that we accept the mistakes that we in Greece and we in Cyprus have made in the last year and have not been able to move ahead with the strategic goals that we have set, because it's just as important an Estonian child understanding a Cypriot child as it is for Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots children to participate in initiatives together and to be able to build a common strategy for what we need for Cyprus in the future. I think we are behind in terms of this strategic thinking all around. I don't think we have made enough steps in doing it, and it needs to be much more nuanced than it was in the past periods when we talked about enlargement. And just to add in this regard, a final point, it has to be based on brave decisions, brave political decisions, not kicking the can down the road and being honest about what we need. And we need to be honest also on our Ukraine policy, which we're not always honest enough about what we can do and what we cannot do, and what we should do, but maybe what we're not able to do. And that needs honesty. We need to be honest about mistakes of the past, and we need to be honest that what we need is brave decisions, just like, and we have seen this example, the Prespa agreement of 2018, where two countries sat on the table, took difficult decisions, but managed to unlock the European enlargement process. This is what we need, and we do not have the luxury in this world, in this changing, unstable world, where there is no Western primacy anymore, to kick the can down the road all the time. We need to have strategy and brave decisions.
If I may, a comment, there is this fashion now to talk about innovation. So everything has to have the word of innovation. Innovation here, innovation there, and there, and there, and there, and everything is innovative, and strategy is innovative, etc. And Europe has the mission, the Horizon missions, that it's the new innovative methodology of planning, etc., etc. One of the issues that was placed here and also in other panels that we have been in the morning is that we are seeking for change, but we are talking about innovation, but we are not ready, as the panelists said in different ways and from different perspectives, to take the chance of thinking in an innovative way of how to change our institutions in order to make things work. Innovation has 3 levels. We either innovate our organization from 0 to 100, from 100 to 0, so we reform them completely. We either reform part of it, or we decide to create new processes and new products and new services in our organizations. We have to think, and we have to know what kind of capacity we have in order to face different processes of innovation. So I think what the 3 of you and also the minister have been said, and also the public, is that we are all of us seeking innovation to occur in our institutions, in our policies, in our rule of law, in our strategies, in the way we think of our strategies. It's not possible anymore in a very fast changing and uncertain world to stick with strategies that take us too long to elaborate, and when we are ready to, and we said, okay, we have our strategy elaborated, we are not able to implement it because everything is changed. So we need to create institutions, processes, and to prepare the youth, as you said, to know what's true and what's wrong, what's right and what's not what's a lie, in order to be able to take scientific, validated decisions. Because it's becoming more difficult to do that, and in order to innovate, we need to stick to something that is solid, right? So what I feel is that we, as Evan said, we are trying to change things by sticking on the same strategy, sticking on the same house, sticking on the same people, sticking on the same thought. Maybe it's too disruptive, but that's my role here. We need to close, so I would like you to give your conclusion on EU enlargement security challenges and give a closing position on this panel.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of innovation and where can Cyprus help? Innovations that the European Union needs to be able to take on board new member states have to do with reforming EU decision-making and EU institutions. If you move from 27 veto-applying countries to 35 or more veto-applying countries, decision-making will grind to a halt. So we need Cyprus to contribute to a discussion at European level about making our decision-making structures in Europe enlargement-proof. The other area where we need change before we can have new member states is to reform EU spending and the EU budget. We will need more money to deal with questions such as the defense dimension, the environmental dimension, the greying of the population, the enlargement process, etc. Enlargement will not happen unless it can be financed. And it can only be financed if we reform the budget. There too, Cyprus can help. And a third and final area, of course, Cyprus as an EU member state is entitled to European Union solidarity when it comes to its security. But Cyprus itself, of course, will also be called upon to redouble its already very impressive efforts to help and build bridges across the green line on this island. And perhaps a little bit more can be done in that dimension, particularly in terms of confidence-building measures. There is a lot of low-hanging fruit that is ready to be collected in terms of confidence-building measures if the political will is there. That runs from questions to do with education to questions to do with sports. Why is there still not an exchange at sports level across the green line? Confidence building starts at low level. There's a lot more that can be done, even with a difficult and obstructive government on the Turkish Cypriot side. So I hope that Cyprus will redouble its efforts, not only to support the EU in what the EU is doing, but to contribute actively in this process of innovation to reform the European Union and make it more effective.
Thank you. I agree fully on the question of innovation, and that's what we need. We need to be able to think of more innovative positions. And I would like to add to which ones these could be. On the question of decision-making and qualified majority voting, I think a discussion like this could be constructive and important if it is clearly connected to the interests of Greece and Cyprus that have to do with the security and defense of their sovereignty and sovereign rights. If there is a framework for EU-Turkey relations to go ahead, for recognizing the concerns in terms of defense and security of Cyprus and Greece, then we can have a constructive discussion about changing the structure of decision-making in the European Union. We are member states, and this is an important defense challenge and defense concern, extremely important, as is the question of Ukraine, where, of course, we have a Russian invasion. And there we have seen how important the question of sovereignty and of violation of international law is. So in this regard, we need to be innovative if we're going to discuss decision-making in the EU, also in terms of EU-Turkey relations and in terms of our concerns in the Eastern Mediterranean. Secondly, question of innovation that has to do with the common foreign and security policy. I don't know if it's innovative or not, but the EU has to have a much stronger role in supporting peace in the region, peace on the basis of international law. We have absolutely no face in the world if we don't have a strategy for Ukraine, We don't have a face in the world if we have double standards on the question of Israel right now and the situation there, and thousands of civilians who are being killed. If the EU cannot play a role in promoting peace, in fighting terrorism without having thousands of civilian casualties, in promoting peace in the Middle East, then what can be its reliability in the rest of the world? So we need innovative thinking in terms of leadership for Europe as a international force. Lastly, question of infrastructure, and Mario Draghi has clearly highlighted its importance for the economy and for the future of the region. Now we have we're going to have a Greek commissioner in charge of questions of transport and infrastructure. I think most definitely there are extremely important projects in the region. There are and should be even more priority projects in the Eastern Mediterranean that Cyprus and Greece can have a central role in, and we need a new Greece-Cyprus strategy that goes beyond the strategy of the last 10 years, which was oriented on the question of hydrocarbons and in particular pipelines. We need a new Greece-Cyprus strategy for the region that has to do with interconnectivity, has to do with energy cooperation, has to be part of Europe. And I think Cyprus and Greece can be leaders in this question and at the same time reinvigorate the role of the EU in the region. I said lastly, but I have the absolute last position. There cannot be a discussion of reliability of the European Union in terms of how ready it is and how innovative it is to face the challenges of the future if it doesn't prove it can solve its problems in its own neighborhood. The EU must support all efforts for the just and viable solution of the Cyprus issue. And this must be a constant message. It is not something the EU can do alone. The EU did not resolve the Macedonian issue. Greece and North Macedonia resolved it, but the EU supported it. So we need political will here on the island, we need political will in Greece and Turkey, and we need the full support of the EU on this question.
And first of all, we needed another couple of hours for this debate. Let me just, of course, completely agree with what you have said there, and let me just make a few points, again, with the EU. And this is why I think we should insist that the EU is also a normative power, it is a community of law, and it must act as such with regard to Cyprus, with regard to others in our neighborhood and beyond. We must not, of course, have double standards. I think we've talked of innovation. We can say something about new mental maps through which to see the world. There's no Western primacy or no Western primacy, but Western leadership. We can also say what we should do is push back on revisionist powers that are affronting our values, but be flexible with others. I'm thinking here, for example, about Africans and other countries that want to have a more say in global affairs. The EU must make these bridges, and it must avoid these double standards because it is a community of law, and it is a power for multilateralism and the power of multilateralism to do that. Just to pick up on QMV and institutional reforms, and this is a big discussion, and of course we could spend a long time discussing it. Let me just say, of course, this is a question of national survival, of sovereignty. It is very important for Cyprus. We would, and for other countries, so there would not be any abuse of the veto power. And let me just say that QMV is not a panacea. We have seen decisions taken in 2016 on migration by QMV. They were never enforced. If you lack political will, you will not go ahead with that. If also you go through with QMV at the time when we have contestation by others, what we do is we expose our disunity to the world, and we are prey to others picking on that. So let's think hard about how to reform our institutions, how to make sure that all EU countries understand that what is good for the EU is good for my own country. And then a lot of the other things would be solved. Thank you very much.